Salete omnes, we've come to our third video for chapter 41, and that's about the perfect passive participles. So this one's going to be super short compared to the last one because there's just not a lot to say about this. So, how do we make a perfect passive participle? We're going to use the fourth principal part of the verb. That's it. There's no getting stems or taking apart anything or thinking about what conjugation the verb is. As long as the verb's got a normal looking fourth principal part, you've got your perfect past participle. The end. So here would be an example of that. Opugnatus. So this comes from the verb opugno. If we looked at all four parts, opugno, opugnare, opugnawi, and then we'd find opugnatus. Now, when you first learn verbs, you are always just given the form. Other books do it this way because they know that eventually you're going to use that fourth part as this participle, and that participle is going to need a male, a female, and a neuter form. Okay, it's a tomato kind of thing. So all those fourth parts that you've learned that have on them, just imagine now there's also an us and an a. No biggie. What do you do with it if you see one in a sentence? You translate it as having been blanked. This makes sense because it's perfect, so it should happen in the past, and it's passive, so having been blanked implies that whatever's happening happened to the noun you're modifying. Unlike the present active participle from last time where the noun you're modifying was doing that action. Atalanta was kneeling. But in this case, so-and-so having been seen or told. So-and-so isn't doing the telling or the seeing. So-and-so is being told. And being told in the past. It already happened. Now, if you don't want to say having been, cool. Don't say having been. Just say the meaning of the word and make it its past tense form. So usually that's ed, that's my shorthand. But whatever it might be for your particular verb, that's what you do. So here's an example. Opugnatus aum, we know that's the fourth part of opugno. So if we encounter that by itself, then we would say having been attacked, or just say attacked. That's perfectly fine. Now, we do need to be careful because we also know that this fourth principal part does help form perfect passive verbs. In fact, that's why it helps form perfect passive verbs, because it's a perfect passive form in and of itself. It also can form perfect passive infinitives. And since Latin literature has this really pesky habit of leaving out forms of sum, which of course would make opugnatus either a perfect passive verb or a perfect passive infinitive, sometimes it can be a little tricky to know whether or not you're doing just a participle or if you're supposed to assume that there's a sum or some version of sum there. Here's an easy trick to know. If the participle is in the nominative, it could be opugnatus followed by sum. But if the sentence already has a main verb, well, then don't worry about it. That's not good. This is just a participle then. The main verb then is the main verb, whatever it might be. If your sentence doesn't have a main verb and you see this participle, and that participle is nominative, okay, then you probably are supposed to have some kind of form of sum after it. Most things that we'll read, they'll tell you that. They'll tell you what form of sum you should assume there so you can figure out tense and all that stuff. Likewise, if this is supposed to be an infinitive, okay, if you are in what you are pretty sure is an indirect statement, and you come across a version of this in the accusative, pretty good bet is they left off the essa, all right? But if you're pretty safe saying, yeah, this is not an indirect statement, I don't have a mental action verb or something like that, then yeah, this participle is just a participle. And again, when we read things, if that's going to come up, our notes will usually help us with that. I just want you to be aware that that is a possibility. So, there are a couple examples of sentences where this could happen. Hostes a Hercule soci isque opugnati in magnis numeris ceciderunt. So this is our example sentence from video 1 for the perfect passive participle. Hostes, the enemy, and then we have this comma. So again, the comma tells us there's something causing the sentence to pause. We look down here, we see a Hercule soci isque, so some kind of ablative phrase involving Hercules and allies, and then opugnati. Oh, there's that fourth part of opugno. It's got an I on it, which looks like it would agree with hostes. Yeah, we've got a participle. And this particular participle, because there's stuff in between the noun and it, is taking a predicate. A Hercule soci isque, well, you got a plus a person involved with a passive voice situation. So yeah, we probably have an ablative of agent here. So the enemy, opugnati, attacked a Hercule soci isque by Hercules and his allies in magnis numeris ceciderunt. So back to the subject again, the hostes fell ceciderunt in magnis numeris, in great numbers. Okay, so again, opugnati allows us to describe the hostes a little bit more without writing a whole other sentence to do it. But the main action is here outside of the commas. Another example, Hercules misericordiam puero terito demonstrat. So here we have terito, the fourth part of tereo, to frighten, and it's got an O on it just like the word puero. But notice there's nothing in between them. So in this instance, we don't have a predicate for terito. It's just going to modify puero. So here would just be a regular adjective. Fortunately, Latin doesn't care if it's being used as a regular adjective or as a verbal adjective. The endings are going to be the same. It's an us, a, adjective. You're going to use first and second declension endings like every other us, a, adjective. So that's a nice help. So misericordiam is mercy. Hercules demonstrat shows misericordiam, mercy, to the puero terito, the frightened boy. You might start to realize you've seen some words that are really participles as just plain adjectives in your vocabulary. Teritos would be a good example of that. Frightened. Because, yeah, it can just be a plain old adjective. Same with paratus, prepared or ready. Again, paratus is really the fourth part of paro, to prepare, to ready. So really it's having been prepared or having been readied. But you can also just use it as a plain old adjective. Okay. It gives us more definition about one of our nouns. It tells us in this case that the boy is frightened or has been frightened. Okay, cool. So that's the perfect passive participle. I will tell you, of the three, this is the one that gets used the most. So when you're dealing with participles, more often than not, it will be a perfect passive one. So this is one you really want to make sure that you understand well. All right. Again, watch the video as much as you need to. It's not super long. Won't take you very long to do it. And the next time is the last video we're going to do, and that's about the future active participle. And like this one, it'll be super short. All right. Until then, valete omnes.